Hey, welcome back to Spellbound. I'm BEEJ, and this is my 2026 Peter Pan Retellings TBR. So 3 or 4 years ago, I did this for the first time, and I made a massive TBR of all of the Peter Pan retellings that I could get my hands on. And then I read as many of them as I possibly could in a single month. I think I read between 13 and 15 Peter Pan retellings, and that was too many. So since then, I've usually just tried to pick up like 1 or 2 a year and read them in August because I hate the month of August. The month of August feels like 4 o'clock p.m. Thursday and like the color dandelion yellow. They all feel like the doldrums of the year. So Peter Pan retellings, why are they everywhere? Why are millennials so obsessed with Peter Pan? And I did a whole video essay on it, and I mean, it's not hard to figure out why, right? Like the vanishing cultural milestones, the rise of empathy, and the defining millennial characteristic of having our own fate predetermined, and our choices removed from us by a previous generation. So I understand and I champion the trend of Peter Pan retellings. First of all, if you know me, then you know that I believe that my opinions are correct, and that's because that they are. However, when it comes to Peter Pan books, I am a Peter Pan enthusiast, I'm a Peter Pan purist, I'm a Peter Pan expert, but also just as a fan of the story of Peter Pan. It's Peter and Wendy is my favorite book of all time. Peter Pan is my favorite story of all time. It is rich with social commentary. It is rich with subtext. It's rich with imagination and nonsense and whimsy, and it's rich with pejorative and racist undertones that need to be addressed and dismantled. So it is just rich in general. And I love seeing, especially in this conversation on millennials being obsessed with Peter Pan and having their own takes on it, I love seeing what they bring to that conversation when they bring something to the conversation that's more than just smut. What if Wendy is gangbanged by all the Lost Boys? You know what I mean? Like there's more in the Peter Pan especially right now, than just smut. So I do have that take, a uniquely superior take, and I am not ashamed of it in this regard. I won't apologize for it. But that does mean that if I'm recommending to you a Peter Pan retelling, it's going to have a significant point of view. It is going to be rich in writing, rich in quality, rich in storytelling, and with subtext, and probably a lot of social commentary. So I can promise you that. So let's dive in together. The first half of the video is going to be recommendations from over the past few years that I have read of Peter Pan retellings, and then the second half is going to be my and your TBR. Somehow, I don't entirely remember, but I'm pretty sure, I'm like 90% sure that in my first episode of this, I never actually talked about Peter Pan. Peter Pan is the play. Peter Pan is the story about a boy who doesn't grow up. He is already sort of a fable. He's a character in these, like in children's imaginations. They're aware of Peter Pan as a concept, as a character. And it's about this family of 3 human children, Wendy, Michael, and John. And one night, Peter Pan comes to visit them in the window of their nursery, and Wendy is like right on the precipice of growing up. And so that's important that it's on the eve of this really big decision that Peter Pan comes to the window and he teaches them to fly, and he says, "Come away with me to Neverland." And so he takes them to this magical land where there are all sorts of characters and all sorts of adventures and danger. And then eventually Wendy, she decides and she says, "You know what? This is super fun, but I want to grow up. Will you take me home?" And Wendy grows up. And so that's the story of Peter Pan. That's as simple as I can possibly make it. Because this is my favorite story of all time, this is going to be a feat of all feats if I can get through this video. There's no way to get through it without any tangents, but with as few tangents as possible, because there's genuinely so much that I could say about this. This is my thing. This is, if I had a thing, a hyperfixation, a passion, a everything, it is this. It is the story of Peter Pan. So we'll do this together. You'll help me keep me on track. I appreciate you already. You're doing such a great job. That is the original story of Peter Pan. I highly recommend that you read it. If you are so inclined to watch a film adaptation version, the most superior adaptation is going to be the 2003 Universal Studios starring Jeremy Sumpter and Jason Isaacs. That is the most official, true to the story version of Peter Pan. It's not going to be the Disney movie, obviously. And it's not going to be, and I will die on this hill, it's not going to be Hook by Steven Spielberg. Back of the book, with the first words of the book, all children grow up except one. The premise of the movie Hook by Steven Spielberg is what if Peter Pan grew up? Peter Pan doesn't grow up. That's the whole point. That's the whole point of the story. I don't accept it. Now, let's talk retellings. Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson. Overlooking the early 2010s glossy cover, this is a superior retelling of Peter Pan. This might be my biggest and truest recommendation for a Peter Pan retelling. It is very true to the original story in that like all of the same beats happen, except it has a very significant and important difference to it. The perspective and the lens through which we see the story is through the character of Tiger Lily as she watches the story unfold. But also, she's not who's telling the story. The story is told through Tinkerbell. Tinkerbell does not speak in this version. So in the same way, this is through her eyes as she's watching this happen, and she's telling the story of Tiger Lily growing up on Neverland as the story happens. Now, the chief underlying lens of this story and the themes explored in this is the themes of colonization and indigenous cultures. Because the original story, as I mentioned before, does have really pejorative and racist stereotypes to it. It was a product of its time. That does not excuse it. And so how can we explore and take the richness of the story and everything that it talks about and the beauty and heartbreak of growing up, which is what the story is about? How can you tell that story not just in a more responsible way, but in a way that also tells the story of the other characters of the story? Because there are characters, there are indigenous characters in Peter Pan that were indigenous to Neverland. The chief's daughter is named Tiger Lily in the original story of Peter Pan, and they kind of have a little flirtation. And it's very little, it's very minor. It is just enough to basically rile Wendy up, and it's used as such as a plot device, which is dumb. But the Lost Boys and Peter Pan they have a very good relationship with the indigenous tribe of Neverland in the story, in the original story of Peter Pan. So this explores what that looks like and what that looks like when the pirates come, because there are also pirates in Peter Pan, and they are, to the Lost Boys, the main antagonists of the story. Well, I mean, this tells the story of Peter Pan. It tells the narrative of Peter Pan, the narrative beats, and it explores the same themes, but it does so with a keen lens of colonization. And it is absolutely heartbreaking and spectacular. The thing about Peter Pan is that it really cherishes and holds both the beauty and joy and grief of growing up and what that looks like to grow up and participate in a world that is harmful and also choose to do that. And so what does that look like as Tiger Lily chooses to do that? This is just a spectacular book. I cannot recommend it enough. I'm still emotionally recovering from this book. But beat-wise, story beats, this is actually going to be the most true to form story with, I think, the most important lens and take on the story. Going in a bit of a different direction, this one's going to be much more emotional in nature, and it's much more cerebral. So this is Peter Darling by Austen Chant. I loved this book. This is a gender take on Peter Pan. This is a trans take. And so this is about Wendy doesn't want to grow up to be Wendy for a reason. Wendy, in fact, would prefer a completely different identity. And so this is what that looks like when Wendy goes away to Neverland and becomes Peter Pan and decides to take on an entirely new life, an entirely new identity and way of working, like looking at the world and participating and showing up in the world. And what does that look like meeting Captain Hook? And so, like I said, this is much more cerebral. It's much more emotional in nature. It does not have the same story structure or narrative. And I don't think that it has to. I'm not saying that that's like, it needs to tell the same story. It's not. It's looking at the same themes of what does it look like when you're on the precipice of growing up and becoming someone that you never wanted to be in the first place, which Peter could relate to. He decided not to grow up because he didn't want to. And so this looks at what that looks like from Wendy's perspective a little bit differently. I loved this very much. The writing at the sentence level was very good. Overall, at like the story structure level, it reads kind of like a novella in 3 distinct acts. It's not novella length. It is a novel. So it just reads reads a little bit differently, but not in a bad way, just not in a typical story structure way. And I very much loved this book and I very much recommend it. This one is my favorite Peter Pan retelling because this one is the most violent. A lot of Peter Pan retellings look at the perspective of Hook, Captain Hook, and how Captain Hook got to Neverland and why he's there, and most importantly, why he's pissed. Because in the original story of Peter Pan's main adversary is Captain Hook. The story goes that Peter chopped off Captain Hook's right hand and fed it to a crocodile. The crocodile has swallowed a clock, and so you can always hear it coming. It's ticking and talking through the water. The legend is the croc liked the taste of Hook so much he's been after him since. And so Captain Hook, his biggest fear is Tick-Tock Croc, and so he's after Peter Pan for revenge. Now, it does not take a degree in literature to put that very simplistic romantic literature symbolism together to see that, like, Captain Hook, like, the whole story is about mortality, the whole story is about growing up, and Captain Hook is afraid of time. Time is forever chasing him, not Peter. So he resents Peter for his youth. In fact, that's kind of what he's always shouting. Like, he's given very few lines and they're always very corny, and he's like, you proud and insolent youth. And that's what he's mad about. Right. And so a lot of literary Peter Pan retellings look at Captain Hook and really zoom in on this resentment and on this resentment of youth and what it must have been like when James Hook first got to Neverland, and what was that relationship with Peter like, and how come James Hook aged on Neverland, but Peter didn't. And so a lot of different retellings explored that. But what I noticed that a lot of them did was that they didn't have a unique point of view, or unique enough. A lot of them were just really angsty. A lot of them were very woeful. One in particular that I'm thinking of was called Hooked. It has a beautiful blue cover, but it was just so wah. It was just so whiny to me. Like, do something about it. Fight him, you know? And the book wasn't very violent at all. And so I unhauled it. This one, however, did explore what it was like when and how the Lost Boys and James Hook got to Neverland, and then what happened. And this really takes a very clear point of view of Peter Pan as the villain. Now, that as a concept is very, very, very sublimated, subtextual in the original text. There are different ways of looking at it. First and foremost, when it was novelized in a time where the story is romantic literature. So you don't have as much deep character analysis on, like, their degrees of hero and villain in the same way, because it's all plot. The plot happens to the main character and then they leave changed. It's very like Alice in Wonderland. Who is Alice? What makes up her character? Not much. Similarly, romantic literature doesn't like explore the nuances of character. But you don't have to reach too far to take an opinion that Peter Pan is in fact a villain, if not the villain of the story. He's not a good guy for sure. He's certainly not the protagonist. You're not rooting for him because he doesn't change. He's an entity. And so a lot of modern day retellings really lean into this and really are like, hang on, he doesn't seem to be a super good, he's certainly not empathetic. He can't be. He's a child. He's very selfish. Of course he is. He's a child. He kind of takes children away from their homes because he believes that it's a cruel fate to grow up. Oh, because he's a coward, because he's a child. So what does it look like to, like, really lean into these themes of Peter Pan as villain? None do it better than Christina Henry. I love Christina Henry. She's ruthless. This is the most ruthless book ever. It absolutely guts you from the beginning and doesn't let you go until the end. The best way I can describe this is Peter Pan meets Lord of the Flies. This is very brutal. It is very, not quite survivalistic, but kind of in the way of, like, they're just taken from their homes, from the things that they know, and they're brought to this place, and their leader is a self-absorbed little shit who doesn't have their best interests at heart, who is entirely self-absorbed and doesn't intend to take care of them, but he absolutely expects obedience because he considers himself the leader of the Lost Boys. What does that look like? What does that look like for a kid who maybe might have made a different choice had he been given agency of choice? So the resentment is at a level 10. The violence is at a level 10. I love this book so much. It is because of those themes and because of that violence that this one is my favorite retelling, but I would not necessarily say it is the best out of the bunch. It just takes all of the things of, like, ooh, but what if, and just turns that knob all the way up. Love this one so much. This is Lost Boy by Christina Henry. Now, I did mention that I read some smutty books in there, and I did. What was that one that was everywhere? Everybody had a book review of this. It was The Never King I read like the first two of those and then it was like, I can't do this anymore. There was more descriptions of the pancakes than there was of anything that happened in the plot. But it was basically just Wendy getting cereal banged by all the Lost Boys. And, you know, I love that for her. But it really just made me hungry for whatever the fuck cloudberry pancakes are. Like, to me, that sounded more enticing than whoever they were and what they were getting up to. So I did read one smutty retelling that I enjoyed enough to keep it and apparently to get a stupid ass sprayed edge special edition copy from Barnes & Noble when I saw it on the pretty table. So the thing about this one that I liked so much is that this had Easter eggs of the original story. And I was like, you know what? You did your homework. You read the source material enough to give fans of the source material enough, like, if you know, you know. You know, and super fans love that. The story itself, I mean, this is a modern dark romance, and the type of plot structure is a mafia or urban romance type. So there's like a mafia guy, Peter, and his daughter Wendy like comes of age. She's like 20 or something maybe, and she gets kidnapped by this guy who has a vendetta against Peter, whose name is Hook, and I think he owns a bar because of course he does. So anyway, he like kidnaps Wendy in order to get back at Peter, and there's like a dark past. Love it. That's not necessarily an endorsement. It's just if you're going to pick up a smutty romance, you make it this one. If you're a fan of Peter Pan and you want those little like nuggets of like Easter eggs, you know? There was like a nod to Crocodile. There was a nod to Marbles. There was a nod to Lost Boy names. There was a nod to pixie dust and just all kinds of fun stuff in here that weren't just dumb, but in some ways kind of added to the story. They built a rich story around it. And I'm not saying that this one's good, okay? I didn't say that. But like I said, if you're gonna go for smut and you're a fan of Peter Pan, like just combine them in like a super fun way. The final one that I have read and would recommend to you is Lost in the Neverwoods by Aidan Thomas. I love this cover very much. It is the best colors. This one is really, really sad. This one specifically is about grief. I don't want to tell you too much about it because it's not like a third act twist, but it is the third act reveal that makes everything else make sense. So to tell you what the book is about, I feel like thematically spoils that third act reveal. I can say that it's about grief. It's kind of dreamlike because it's Wendy doesn't remember things. And so it's about her piecing her memory together and then coming to terms with some things. This one is sad, but I liked it. It was so well written and so well done as a story. And it was such a unique way to use the common themes and common characters of this story to tell this story that I wanted to keep it. It is a far departure. This is as far from the original material as you can get out of all of these books. However, it was very unique and very good and very sad. And so if you like sad books, you're going to like this one. But also this was truly well done. This and Tiger Lily by Jodi Lynn Anderson were the two best written books out of the bunch. Waterbrick. The next four are books that I personally have not read, but intend to and would love to read with you so that I have someone to talk about with them. Hang on. So that I have someone to talk to about them. I'm a professional writer. Okay, The Other Side of Never by a bunch of people, as it turns out. This is a collection of dark tales from the world of Peter Pan. This is interesting. I've never seen this before. I've never seen a collection of short stories. Hang on. I've never seen a collection of short stories about Peter Pan or a collection of Peter Pan retellings. I love that they're assembled together. I love that it's called The Other Side of Never, and I love that they're all dark tales. Yes, please. The back of the book, I'm so far not enticed necessarily by what it just says, but I think they're being intentionally vague, which I appreciate. A murder investigation leads a detective to a strange place called Neverland. Pupils attend a school for Peters. A young boy loses his shadow and goes to desperate lengths to retrieve it. It's basically just, like I said, takes on the story. But because I have told you I am extraordinarily picky, I feel like I am going to have many things to say about these stories, and probably not all good things. However, I am interested in a lot of the authors from the back of the book. I'm interested in hearing from them and seeing what they think they can bring to this world that we haven't already seen. So I'm approaching this with a very critical eye and probably sarcastic commentary. But I always hope for the best, and I'm always interested, and I'm always willing to hear it out. you know? The next one is interesting, and I don't know why I stayed away from it for so long. This one is Wendy Darling by A.C. Wise. This one was everywhere for a while because it was a featured book and book of the month, and I was interested by that, but then very soon after that, sequels to this started coming out, and I was like, if this book was as good as it and others said that it wouldn't require a sequel, would it? Why did it become a series then? So this one takes it in a direction that I never really enjoyed looking at, which is like making it generational. What if when Wendy grows up, she has a daughter Jane and then it's Jane's turn to go to Neverland? I never liked the concept of that. The only thing good that came out of Peter Pan Return to Neverland from like 2002 was the song I'll Try, which was only ever good when it was done by Jesse McCartney on Disney Mania Volume 4. However, I understand that that's a deep personal bias. However, I'm bringing that deep personal bias into this book. So basically, that's what happens. Peter shows up at the window. He's here for Jane. He takes Jane, and Wendy is like, "Actually, I'm gonna go get Jane back," which again feels like taking that agency and choice away from Jane, first of all. And so, second of all, it feels really ominous on the back of the book. And if I had to guess, it's hinting at like themes of sexual assault that she's trying to prevent happening from Jane, which, like, we do appreciate that in a parent. However, because the back of the book is so ominous, I don't know. And then because it's a series, it just makes me feel like you either needed more books to say what you said, in which case you didn't say it well enough the first time, or it's just like adding on to the series when it doesn't need to, in which case, like, there's too much of that going on anyway. So I don't know. I'm going into this with such a negative bias. I've kept it around for years because I'm just curious enough, because I would very much like to know. And also the sequel of this book, because I've come close to like unhauling this a few times and being like, I don't actually want to know what happens to Jane, because who cares about Jane? But the sequel of this book like has Hook iconography on it and looks like it's looking a little bit more closely at Hook, and I am interested in that. But I can't just read the sequel and not the first one, so this is a sort of a necessary evil. This one looks great and intense. This is called These Deathless Shores by P.H. Lowe. This looks really great. This looks a little bit more gritty than some of the others, so I am going to read you the back of this book. Jordan was once a lost boy, convinced she would never grow up. Now she's 22 and exiled to the real world, still suffering withdrawal from the addictive magic dust of her childhood. With nothing left to lose, Jordan returns to the island and its stories of pirates and war and the cruelty of youth, intent on facing Peter one last time on her own terms. If that makes her the villain, so be it. Gorgeous and devastating, this debut fantasy is the richly reimagined tale of Captain Hook's origin, a story of cruelty, magic, lost innocence, and the indelible power of stories. Yes, 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 yes. Now, this is very, very intimidating. This is a very thick book, 420-something pages, 430 pages. This has something to say, and I'm very interested in it. I don't know if I can get to this one this year, but man, every time I read the back of the book, it makes me want to sit down right now and read it. So maybe I will get to this one this year. We'll have to see. It just feels like it has to be started on a rainy day. You know, this is not a float in the pool, sunshine read. You know, this is a dark and gloomy sort of a tale. And I saved the best for last. The last book on this list is the book that I personally and specifically intend to read in the month of August, and that is The Child Thief by Brahm. This book is actually on my top 10 must-reads by the end of the year. I am so stupidly excited for this book. I actually thought it was recently published, and then I was talking to a friend of mine, and they were like, "Oh, I read that in high school." And I was like, "Say what? How did I not know that this book existed? How did I know that this author existed?" I only read Slewfoot for the first time like 2 years ago, and I knew for a long time that I was going to love it. I was just intimidated by how much I knew that I was going to love it, and then I read it, and then I obviously loved it tremendously. So then I just went out and got like a whole bunch more by Brahm. I love the dimensions of Brahm's books. I love that they look like storybooks because they're supposed to. I love that they are difficult to pick up and put down because they're meant to be read in one sitting, despite how intimidating, they look, but also they have pictures. I love this. This is obviously a very Fae-like type of take on Peter, in which he is, a bad guy and a child thief and a Fae, because he's literally named after the god Pan, who is a trickster spirit. Mercury moves between worlds. He is the messenger. He is the trickster, the ultimate trickster god. Pan. Look at that. Look at it. Beautiful and authentically dark. Yes. That's what I would like, please. And also, I have to read it before the end of the year. It's a rule that I set for myself, and I really hate telling myself what to do, almost as much as I hate being told what to do and doing what I've been told, which happens so little. But in this instance, I intend to follow through because I genuinely want to read it. So I would love it if you would read it with me so that so we can geek out over it together. So those were 10 Peter Pan retellings, 6 recommendations, and 4 TBRs that I cannot wait to share with you. I would love to know if you've read any of these books before and if you had or have opinions on them. I would just love it if you could just give me all of the hot and cold takes that you have. I want all of them. And even if they're different from mine, okay, I respect it. I won't fight you on this because everyone is entitled to their own ridiculous opinion. And so I just want to know them. I want to know what resonated with you, if anything. Have you ever did you grow up liking Peter Pan? Was specifically the characters of, or the actors of Jeremy Sumpter and Jason Isaacs, was that critical to your development as you were a tween, in the same way? Because I am speaking for myself and also a generation that that was a canon event of when that movie came out in 2003. So I would love to know your opinions on that. And also just anything else that you're reading, I would love for you to tell me. And as always, stay safe, drink your water, fight fascism, and happy reading.